Take a look at this guy. It's a stereo reel-to-reel tape machine. And I mean, it's kind of a beast. It weighs a ton. It's super touchy to get working, but it sounds incredible. I mean, just the vibe is unmatched, right? You've got this vintage wood. It reminds me of being at my grandparents' house. But the sound, the tape warmth of the playback, the imperfections, it's a sound designer's dream. Now, if you will, imagine cramming a few dozen of these underneath a keyboard, one per each note. What would you call that? Well, history would say you'd call it a Mellotron. If you don't recognize the name Mellotron, I wouldn't blame you, but you've definitely heard one of its signature sounds. These instruments were the precursors to modern samplers. Instead of using digital recordings of sounds, they were tape recordings. The first Mellotron was released all the way back in 1963 and was actually inspired by, or some would say a copy of, an earlier instrument called the Chamberlin, but that's another story. Each time you'd press a note on a Mellotron, the inner mechanics would press a tape head against a reel of tape, like this one, that would start to run, usually for a maximum of 8 seconds. Each time you'd release a note, the tape would be rewound via a spring-loaded mechanism. It was pretty intense, actually. You could hear it happening. Listen to the keyboard sound in the Beatles' Strawberry Fields, and you'll be hearing maybe the most famous instance of a Mellotron preset in pop music.
This is a Mellotron.
So, what have we been up to with this guy? Well, we were pretty inspired by this innovation of old. I've always thought the Mellotron was an incredibly cool piece of gear just because of how hard they had to work to get it to actually make sense, to make music. So we sampled a bunch of sound sources through this tape machine, recording one note at a time, and then chopping everything back up inside the audio engine in Sunday Keys. We worked up some riffs on the classic presets like flutes, strings, and choir, and we also asked, what would it have been like if a vintage Mellotron would have had a saw lead or a shimmer pad? And this is what it all sounds like. So that's the iconic Mellotron flute sound. That's what you hear on Strawberry Fields. It's very popular, still used in like indie, poppy stuff. For a long time, I loved that sound and I didn't know what it was. I remember how excited I was when I finally figured out how to search for that sound by name. But now we've got it in Sunday Keys. And it came through this guy. It's pretty cool. Here's some more presets. This is a choir. Here's another preset. This one's a bit more like pushing into new directions. What if a nylon guitar had come through a Mellotron? Here's a full orchestra. We're talking strings, brass, all sampled through the same kind of approach as a vintage Mellotron. This was an experiment with pushing a saw synth through this same tape machine processing. I want you to listen how as each note is sustained, you notice all this bit of warble, this imperfection. That was what was so iconic about the Mellotron, was just how fragile the machine was. In fact, it was known for being notoriously difficult to maintain. It was very prone to breakdown. But for our purposes, that sense of imperfection is really the detail, the nuance that makes the instrument feel so alive. So yes, this is a saw synth, but it's like no other saw synth out there. Listen to what comes through from just 2 notes played at the same time. Here's another modern take. What would a Mellotron shimmer pad sound like? This one's a bit more of a recreation of a classic string preset. And once we had that classic dry string sound, we also voiced it as a pad. Tape machine synth bass actually sounds incredible. Last but not least, of course, we had to sample the classic warm pad through this beautiful warm tape machine to see what we could come up with. You just get all of that little pitch imperfection, that warble. It's like no other warm pad. So this tape machine was a huge source of inspiration for us, and of course, the whole history of the Mellotron. It's an incredible instrument. We're not officially affiliated with Mellotron, we just love the idea of that kind of sound and how hard they worked to achieve those great presets. Now, these sources of inspiration are available to you inside of the Sunday Keys sound library too. You can easily find these presets in the sound browser. Just choose the source model filtering option, scroll down and select Tape Machine, and you'll see all of these Mellotron-inspired presets inside the Sunday Keys sound library.